Hello everyone, welcome to the Python course conclusion. So some of you might have noticed that our Python programming course is now finished. We've learned 10 different things and we're pretty much ready to expand our knowledge in the Python community. But before we can actually do that, I'd like to go over what we've learned so far in a video. We might call this a conclusion. Okay, so our first course tutorial was installing Python 3.4.2, which is the latest version. Okay, so the steps for doing this were: visit the Python website, navigate to the download page and download Python 3.4.2 or the latest version. Okay, that's simple enough. But then we got onto printing, and we need to know what printing is. So printing is sending a message to the console to inform a user of something or to persuade them to do something. How can you use printing? You can print something using the print function. Could you give me an example? Print hello world. And then we went on to types and variables. So what are types and variables? Types are iterators that allow a programming language, in this case Python, to understand what something is. What are variables? A variable is a word or phrase connected by underscores that references to information. How can you use types or variables? You can give something a type by entering int, float or string before it and surrounding it by parentheses. How can you use variables? You can define a variable by declaring a word or phrase connected by underscores and having it parallel something or equal something. Could you give me an example, please? Okay, my variable is equal to an integer of 5. Okay, but we could do something else. Okay, integer 5, float 5.5, and string. So I guess the cat's out of the bag now. Okay, so they're different examples, each with a different data type. But we can also use variables to equal types of information. So my integer is equal to integer of 5, my float is equal to float of 5.5, and my string is equal to string. So I guess the cat's out of the bag now. And then we went on to input. So what is input? Input is information attained from a user by a computer. How can you use input? You define a variable and have it parallel a type or equal a type and a question and some personal space for the user to enter their answer. Note, the type is the type of answer you're expecting to get back as a response. Could you give me an example, please? My question is equal to a string of input. This is a question, but do you have an answer? Answer, and then you have the personal space. Could I print variables with types if I wanted to? Yes, so here's an example of that. My question is equal to string of input. This is a question, but do you have an answer? Answer with personal space. Print string my question. So in this case, you're asking the user for information and then you're displaying it to them below. And then we went on to if, else and else if. So what are if, else and else if statements? If statements are conditional statements that check to see if a statement is true or false and then does one or two things depending on the result. Else statements are statements used when the condition in an if statement evaluates to false or equals false. It would be right thinking to execute some code instead of the code executed when the statement evaluates to true or equals true. And else if statements are multiple statements used to try the same variable. So how can you use if, else and else if statements? You can use if, else and else if statements in a comparison between two things using operators. Could you give me an example, please? User answer is equal to integer of input, enter an integer. Then we're defining the variable my variable and we're having that equal to user my answer. So we're defining a variable that references to another variable that references to this variable. So we can't really go wrong there. And then we're saying if my variable is greater than 10, print the integer you entered is greater than 10. But also if the variable is greater than 20, print the integer you entered is greater than 20, and so on. But then we're doing if the variable isn't greater than the maximum limit of 500, the integer you entered wasn't greater than 10, 20, 40, 80 or 500. And we noticed that we used input and variables with that example. Cool. And then we went on to functions. What are functions? Functions are arranged events that can be referenced to or be called. But how can you use them? You must define a function and give it an arrangement of events. Could you give me an example, please? Example: define or definition my function, then open parentheses, so we're doing empty parameters, and then we're printing my function is working. But it actually isn't until we then call it below, until we actually reference to that function. And then we moved on to lists and dictionaries. So what are lists and dictionaries? Lists are arrays of data that can be accessed by index, and dictionaries are collections of unordered values accessed by key rather than index. How can you use lists and dictionaries? You must define a list or a dictionary and provide it with data. It's that simple. Could you give me an example, please? My dictionary is equal to brackets, item 1, item 2, item 3, item 4, and item 5. Then my list is equal to angle brackets, or anchor brackets, item 1, item 2, item 3, item 4, and item 5. Okay, let's do that. Okay, and then we're printing my dictionary and my list, so we're printing this and then we're printing this, so every single item out of these lists or dictionaries will be printed. And then we moved on to lists and functions. What are lists and functions? Lists are arrays of data that can be accessed by index. Functions are arranged events that can be referenced to or be called. How can you use lists and functions? You must define a list and provide it with data, and then you must then use a function in coordination with that. So you can't make a list and then use a function that has nothing to do with that list, because it wouldn't work, it'd produce a syntax error. So could you give me an example, please? Example: shopping underscore basket is equal to empty parameters list. Okay, looked like a dictionary, but it's a list. And then we're making a function called append, and we're going to append to that shopping basket list the item that we enter down here. So while the program is running, while true, we're going to ask the user what item they want to add to the shopping basket, and then we're calling the append function, so this thing up here, and then we're going to add whatever they entered to the shopping basket and print a string of shopping basket and the variable shopping basket, which is our list, which should have been updated by then. And then we moved on to while loops. So what are while loops? While loops are used for repeating sections of programming, but while loops will not run for n number of times until a condition is met. So your loop will not keep on running, it will not repeat until a condition is actually met. So how can you use a while loop or while loops? You can use while loops by defining a condition and checking to see if it has been met. Could you give me an example, please? Example: print a string of singular loop, count is equal to 0, while count is less than 11, print string of number, and then count, and count is being redefined to equal count plus 1. Okay, we don't actually need that print statement there, that was just something I used in that tutorial. And then we moved on to for loops. So what are for loops? For loops are used for repeating sections of programming, just like the while loops, except for loops will run for n number of times without a condition being met. How can you use for loops? Well, you can use for loops by asking if something is in range or is true, etc., because they're not the only things you can do, and then adding an output to that. So could we have an example, please? For letter in video, so for every single letter in the word or the string video, print string current letter. So what we're saying is that we're going to print each string item out of this string. Okay, and now we have our basic syntax. I personally feel as though I didn't go over well enough the types of words and vocabulary we were using in the tutorials in this course. So we're going to go over them now, and hopefully that will give you a better grasp of understanding on the tutorials overall. So, a variable. A variable is a symbolic name or reference to information. Type. In computer science and computer programming, a data type or simply type is a classification identifying one of various types of data, such as real, integer, or boolean, that determines the possible values for that type. the operations that can be done on values of that type, the meaning of the data, and the way it values. Input: information attained by a computer from a user. Output: information attained by a user from a computer. String: a sequence of characters. Integer: a whole number with no decimal. Float: a number with a decimal. And then for more documentation, you can visit the Python docs website URL. So that will be in the description as well. So you can visit that and learn some more basic syntax. Hopefully this Python course conclusion has helped you get a better understanding of Python. Thank you for watching.